Hi, this is JYTV and I am Jadazia Rollins introducing Dr. Zina Bell. Hello, Ms. Zina.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Good to have you. So let's get right into it. You're a licensed psychologist, so was there any specific event in your life that made you want to get into psychology within your family or personal?
In my family, growing up, we have a predisposition for anxiety and substance abuse. So I knew that we had issues, and the mind and the body had always been important to me. I thought psychology was the way that I could learn more about myself, my family, my community, and become a healer.
That's interesting. So can you tell us about your program called CURE and how that came about and what it's about?
The Coalition of Urban Resource Experts, CURE, started when Katrina happened. There was a trauma. We saw a number of African Americans from New Orleans that were affected. We were concerned about stress, the trauma, moving to Houston. And then we had Harvey. So looking at trauma and how it affected the African American community, we came together as African American mental health providers to do trainings and healing circles with an emphasis on the African American community. What do we need to heal?
Okay. How long has this program been around?
Well, Harvey was, in 2017. Katrina was 2005, 2006. We took a little hiatus and we got back together once we realized Harvey had occurred. So it's been around since 2005 and active again since 2017.
Oh, cool. This makes me wonder, about Afrocentric behavior. did you attend a HBCU?
No, I went to a, what do you call it, a PMI, predominantly white institution.
Okay.
I always wanted to go to a HBCU. I didn't make it.
Oh, that sucks. Okay. What do you think is a key principle we should instill into our Black community more?
Coping. I think that because we've come out of so many traumas that have not been recognized, whether we're coming from slavery or Jim Crow or even what we're seeing in terms of people being killed by police, we are traumatized people, and nobody has said, look, you've experienced this trauma, this is how it's going to affect you, this is how we're going to have to heal. For African Americans and Americans, we need to recognize that we've been traumatized.
That's very true. A lot of people think we haven't experienced the things that our ancestors have experienced, so we don't experience as much trauma or any trauma. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, some of the research is saying that the trauma is being genetically passed down so that it's been imprinted in our DNA. So there's a theory called epigenetics that says once the trauma has occurred, it can change the DNA and be passed on through the generations. I don't think that's been acknowledged. The biology, the environment, the political climate, all those are factors that contribute to African Americans having been traumatized.
Yeah, I've never even heard of that before. So I hear there's something you want to tell us and something that we should gather from all this.
I think that mental health in the African American community is very, very important. A decrease in the stigma associated with mental wellness, being able to acknowledge feelings and then being able to express them. I think that because we've been traumatized, a lot of times we don't talk, we don't trust, we may not even know what we're feeling. I want us to open up to the concept that health embodies not just our minds, but it's our souls, it's our bodies, that it's this holistic kind of thing.
a lot of that is reflected here, even at this school. There's a lot of fights and such that have been going on. So do you think that's something that should be required to be taught in schools?
I would like to see education, if nothing else, just being able to say, this is what stress does to your body. This is how people cope with stress. If people would know that fighting, freezing, running are all fight, flight, freeze are all ways that we cope with being in dangerous situations, and then being able to pause and say, am I actually in danger? I know sometimes you can't pause. Other times the fight can be, oh, you looked at me wrong. Pause. Is that dangerous?
No.
Another way to cope. Let's come up with another way to cope.
Interesting. Okay. Okay. Thank you. My name is Jadasia Rollins. This is Dr. Zina Bell, and we'll be back for more. I don't know. We're rolling into the second part of the presentation. We're back with JYTV. This is Jadasia Rollins with Dr. Zina Bell. Okay. So, before we were talking about fighting in black schools mainly. Do you think a lot of this violence starts at home?
I wouldn't make a generalization about violence starting at home. I would more focus on violence as a way of coping. So has someone learned another way to problem solve? So it's not so much that I would look at it as the violence piece, but what are the skills people have to cope with troublesome situations? So I'm still going with this, a lack of information.
Okay. Was there ever a time where you felt you lacked this information?
Yes, I still lack information. As I grow and I take on more responsibilities, I begin to feel more stressed. And for me, feeling more stressed, I go into self-doubt. Am I doing this right? Have I offended someone? So with each level I've acquired and each way I've grown, I've had to learn another way to cope. I've had to add. So my current challenge is to be able to ask people for help because I can't do it all by myself.
Do you feel that the thing about trauma being instilled in our DNA has a lot to do with high blood pressure being a thing that's big in the black community?
I think that's a part of it. I think another part has to do with the food industry. It has to do with food deserts. I was at a presentation and the presenter said that actually African Americans may have a higher normal blood pressure than the values that are established for Americans, the majority. So in some ways, the medical community hasn't looked at what are norms for African Americans. So we may be abnormal in comparison to the majority culture, and we don't have that kind of data. So it's a multi-factor sort of thing.
Okay, I never thought about it like Can you tell us about your healing circles and your 2 factors of healing and
Okay. The healing circles we incorporate, we use the mind-body model. And in the mind-body model, you use meditation, relaxation training, drawing, and being able to discuss or talk about in a safe environment what may be causing you concern. The ideal is to do it for 8 sessions. It's appropriate for people that have experienced any sort of trauma. So the last time we did one, we did it with people that had been incarcerated. Incarceration has affected the African American community, and when people come out of being incarcerated, they've been in a situation where they've been locked down feeling-wise, behaviorally, so having to come back and cope with not having those sorts of restrictions, they have to learn how to cope and heal. The other piece that I've talked about has to do with training. Cultural competency training is important because there's not enough African American providers. I'm focusing on African Americans, but what I'm saying is that with cultural competency, people become aware of other cultures. What are the values in the culture? What are the practices in that culture? What are the routines in that culture? And being able to ask those questions so that you come from a place of strength. When we want to intervene, you understand where that person's coming from, and then you're more able to help them to be able to change. So that's the idea behind the cultural competency trainings. Training and healing circles. Educate, recovery, resiliency, and being able to tap into what makes that person or that community resilient.
Earlier I asked about cultural differences and how that affects trauma, and you tell me about the difference between Afrocentric culture and Eurocentric culture and how it affects behavior. Could you tell them a little bit more about that?
Okay, so when we talk about Afrocentric worldview, oftentimes African Americans are spiritually focused, we're relationship focused, we may not be as involved with time, there ergo CP, and so the value is on the relationship, on our spirituality, on being interconnected. A European worldview may focus more on timeliness, on the nuclear family. So looking at how can we come up with interventions, or how can we come up with strategies or techniques for the African American community that incorporates the relationship and our spirituality. That would be focusing on our strengths. So when we took prayer out of school, maybe that affected African Americans a little bit more than it affected other communities.
Yeah, true. Okay, that's all the questions I have for today. My name is Jadasia Rollins, introducing Dr. Zina Bell, and this is JYTV.